In this video I'm going to take a look at a new wide-angle lens with an incredibly fast speed, the Mitakon Speedmaster 20mm f0.95. The lens is designed for crop sensors and is available in these different mounts. I've been using it on Sony E-mount cameras, on an APS-C camera and a full frame camera in its crop mode. When I was offered this lens to review, I'm not being paid to do the review by the way, I was very curious to see how such a fast, wide-angle lens would perform. And it was delivered at a good time. I had the chance to use the lens on trips to some highly photogenic places. These are all conventional stop-down photos, but I also used the trips to see what kinds of images a very fast wide-angle lens can produce wide open, as well as testing the lens's ability to deliver clean images wider open in low light situations. I'll quickly go through the lens's specs, and then I'll discuss its performance. The first point to make, as I unbox the lens, is that it's quite a big lens. The lens weighs 664 grams with its hood on, and it comes with a good size hood. I kept it on all the time. The lens itself is manual focus. It has 9 aperture blades and 13 elements in 8 groups. It's an impressive technical feat to produce such a fast wide-angle lens. The body of the lens is very solidly built, but my review copy has an aperture ring with a rather loose click around the wide open mark, and I personally found the focus ring is a little too stiff to turn easily. So now let's start with the lens's performance at or near f0.95, since this is the lens's unique selling point. When I've used ultra-fast lenses at f1.2 or faster, I've often wished there was a wider angle option, and here it is. I'm not going to focus on wide-open bokeh to begin with. Instead, I'd like to feature the lens's low light capabilities, because this is where I found the lens to be especially useful. The lens is good for taking shots inside buildings, cathedrals, museums, and so on. Here in Prague's National Museum, for example, there are sumptuous rooms to photograph. And there are exhibits of stuffed animals, all wonderfully presented, but all displayed in very low light. It was great to be able to photograph the animals with an ultra-fast lens, not only because I could capture the animals in low light, but also because it gave me an opportunity to be more creative with my narrow depth of field compositions. Ultra-fast lenses are all very well, but they're not that useful if they're not very sharp wide open. This lens is satisfyingly sharp wide open. Here's a test shot I took wide open in Durham, and I can tell you that most of the fast 50s I've tried wide open couldn't deliver such clear details. The details in focus would be much softer. Close up and still wide open, I'm impressed with the micro details. I have a number of examples to illustrate this. The lens has a minimum focusing distance of 0.3 meters, and this allows you to get reasonably close up to your subjects, while still retaining a more panoramic view of the scene you're photographing. I found the stiffer focus ring helped me to nail the focus when the depth of field is so narrow. And the lens does produce quite pronounced purple fringing, sometimes wide open, but it's not so bad that it can't be dealt with in post-processing. Moving on to the lens's rendering of out-of-focus areas wide open, I think the quality of the bokeh depends, like it so often does, on 1, the composition, and 2, personal taste. If you have a nice, smooth, uncluttered background, then the lens produces nice, smooth bokeh. Where there are distinct highlights in the background, such as these fairy lights, the lens produces clear bokeh balls or bubbles. The bubbles, however, are not going to be as large as the bubbles produced by a fast 50, and it's important to stress that you're not necessarily going to get a fast 50 style bokeh from this lens. Instead, you're going to see a wide-angle view of background blur, as you can see in this photo, for example. Stop down a little, and you begin to see the impact of the blades in out-of-focus highlights. And in common with all lenses, as you stop down, the details become sharper. Not such an advantage with this lens, unless you're looking for more details across the whole frame, because the lens is easily sharp enough on the in-focus areas right from wide open. Where you're photographing a busier background, I wasn't so enamored with the results compared to a fast 50, because you get such a wide-angle view of that busyness, almost too much busyness. You're simply not going to be able to smooth out the busy background in the same way as you can with a close-focusing fast 50 or fast 100mm plus lens. Where I particularly like using the lens were in portrait compositions, where the lens produces great isolation and a wonderful 3D cinematic style pop for portraits. Although I haven't spent a lot of time using the lens for videos, it definitely has the potential to deliver a very artistic look wide open. If you use the lens for vlogging or filmmaking, it could be a good choice for videos where you want to include more of the background, but also have that subject isolation. The big issue wide open is whether you're able to nail the focus. You're going to have to be very precise with the focus and how you move around. So that's my take on wider open performance. Now onto the lens's performance stop down. As I mentioned at the start, I took the lens to some very photogenic places on road trips and on planes. The weight didn't bother me, as I knew I'd find good uses for a 20mm wide-angle lens. Here's a sample of photos I took with the lens stopped down, and as we look at these images, I'll talk about my views on its performance. I enjoyed the 20mm angle on crop, equivalent to a 30mm view on full frame. It's a good walk-around view for all kinds of scenes. You can see wide-angle distortion effects in some compositions, with buildings angling into the center of the frame. Personally, I don't mind this look. I think it adds to the character of the image. The lens produces sharp details stopped down, as long as you nail the focus. However, I have to say I found it harder than I expected to focus the lens. With a wide-angle lens stopped down, I'd normally set the lens at or near infinity, and the image would be in focus from edge to edge. This particular lens required more precise adjustments to focus on the right part of the composition, and because the focus ring was quite stiff, I found this a more difficult task. Although I'm very familiar with manual focusing, I produced quite a high proportion of completely out of focus shots, or shots where the focus plane was in the wrong area of the composition. Perhaps this was my poor technique, but it's something I need to mention. A second observation to make about the lens stopped down concerns the color it produces. The images in certain light conditions, including certain positions of the sun, seem to have a slight tint, most noticeable if you compare the results to other lenses at similar distances. These two images are straight out of camera, from the same camera, using the in-camera auto exposure settings. The tint looks more like the tint produced by vintage lenses, a slight golden brown coloration, something you can, of course, adjust in post-processing. Generally, I didn't find the lens produce such super vibrant colors as the other digital lenses I had with me, but despite this observation, the colors are perfectly serviceable, as long as you get the exposure levels right, as you can see from these non-color adjusted images. My final observation about the lens stopped down and wide open involves its control of very bright light and flares. The lens can be sensitive to very bright light sources, and I found myself overriding the in-camera metering on a number of occasions to avoid blown-out areas in images. I don't mind doing this, but it adds to the time it takes to produce a good image. You can also see the bright light sensitivities in the two wide-open videos we saw earlier. On a more positive note, I do like the starbursts the lens produces, and also the flares you get when you point the lens directly at a very bright light source. It can be very fashionable amongst filmmakers to capture flares in scenes, and this lens won't disappoint. This brings me on to my conclusions, and I have to say that the lens is not perfect. It's not a lens for the faint-hearted. It takes time getting used to, but it has some magical qualities wide open. There's no doubt that if you want a 20mm crop sensor lens for stop-down, general-purpose walk-around photography, there are better options. There are prime and zoom lenses at around 20mm crop or 30mm full frame that are more convenient to use, especially when they have autofocus, and the best of those lenses perform better optically stop-down. However, if you're looking for an ultra-fast wide-angle lens with a lot of artistic wide-open potential, then this lens is an extraordinary optical achievement, not least because it's so impressively sharp wide open. And it's not like you're using a fast 50, because even closer up, you're seeing a wider view of the background blur than fast 50s, so it's a different kind of shooting experience. You have to be careful about busy backgrounds. A 20mm lens, no matter how fast, is not going to easily smooth out busy backgrounds. But with the right compositions, the lens can produce lovely images wide open. As well as the more artistic bokeh images, the lens is excellent for low light situations, especially indoor shots. And I particularly enjoyed using the lens for portraits, where it produces what I'd describe as a cinematic 3D pop. If you want this kind of look, for stills or videos or filmmaking, then this might just be the lens for you. If you're interested, I've included a link in the description below that will take you to the lens. So I hope you've enjoyed the review. I'm very grateful for having been given the chance to try the lens out. Please comment below. I'll be very interested in your views. And until the next time, all the best.